What if a single number could throw an entire country into a panic, reshape a government's whole story, and then, strangely, actually force it to be more honest? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. This is the story of Malaysia's 1 trillion ringgit debt, a number that was both a political weapon and, believe it or not, a trigger for some pretty big changes. Okay.
Okay, so picture this. It's 2018, and this number, 1 trillion, just appears, almost out of nowhere. It completely takes over the headlines in Malaysia, and suddenly everyone's talking, worried that the country is speeding towards bankruptcy. This figure was absolutely designed to shock people, and let me tell you, it worked.
And there it is, the bombshell. Just a few days after a massive, historic election win, Malaysia's new prime minister drops this announcement. And he wasn't just talking about, a simple budget problem. No, he was painting this picture of a nation on the very brink of collapse, and he made sure everyone was watching. Right, so this is where the plot really thickens. The official, by-the-books, legally defined debt was sitting under 700 billion ringgit. So where on earth did this extra 400 billion plus just pop out from? Was this whole thing a lie, or was it something else? Maybe a different kind of truth that was just more politically useful? Let's unpack it.
The impact of that one announcement was immediate, and it was dramatic. We're talking financial markets taking a nosedive, credit rating agencies getting seriously worried, and this story, this narrative of national doom just took hold. The message couldn't have been clearer. We are in a major crisis. So, the big question is, how do you get from a debt of 687 billion all the way up to over a trillion? Well, the new government didn't just make up numbers. What they did was way cleverer. They pulled off a kind of accounting alchemy by completely changing the definition of what debt even meant. And the secret ingredient to this trillion ringgit recipe was this term, contingent liabilities. The easiest way to think about it is like co-signing a loan for a friend. Right now, you don't actually owe any money, but if your friend can't pay, bam, that debt is suddenly all yours. The new government basically decided to take all of those potential future debts and count them as actual debt right now. So let's actually look at the math here. It's pretty straightforward, really. You start with that official debt, about 686 billion. Then you tack on all those government guarantees, those co-signed loans for state companies. Then you add in long-term lease payments for huge projects. And just like that, you've blown past the 1 trillion mark. See, these weren't new numbers. They were just numbers that were moved from the boring footnotes right into the explosive headline.
This slide really gets to the heart of it. It shows the whole strategy in black and white. It was a calculated shift, moving away from a legally precise, kind of narrow definition of debt to a much broader and way more politically powerful one. The country's finances were the same, but the story they told was completely different.
Okay, so why? Why would a brand new government risk scaring off investors and panicking its own people like this? Well, the answer isn't in some accounting textbook. It's straight out of a political playbook.
Look, this was never really about the fine print of fiscal reporting. It was all about creating a crisis narrative. Think about it. If you convince people that the house is on fire, they're not going to argue with you when you start knocking down walls to put it out. It gives you cover to do radical things, like slash public spending or cancel your opponent's pet projects.
The strategy itself was pretty simple, but boy was it effective. Step 1, you declare an emergency. Step 2, you blame the guys who came before you, connecting this giant debt number directly to their well-known corruption scandals, like 1MDB. And then step 3, you use that emergency to push through all the unpopular policies you wanted to do in the first place.
And psychologically, this was just brilliant. See, most of us, our brains can't really feel the difference between, say, 687 billion and 1 trillion. They're both just giant, unimaginable numbers. But the word trillion, that one word, crosses a mental line. It doesn't just sound big, it sounds apocalyptic. It makes the crisis feel incredibly real and immediate.
So, was this all just a cynical political game? Well, this is where the story gets really interesting, because the answer isn't a simple yes. There's a fascinating twist. So get this. It turns out that while the old, narrow way of counting debt was legally correct, it was also kind of hiding the full picture of the country's real financial risk.
So the new government, acting for its own political reasons, had accidentally stumbled upon a more honest way of looking at the nation's finances.
And if you look at this comparison, you can see it right there. The international gold standard for reporting debt, the kind of thing the IMF recommends, actually tells countries to look at the whole picture, including all those contingent liabilities. So that trillion ringgit figure, while it was totally weaponized for shock value, actually had a solid basis in international best practices. So what's the bottom line? It really wasn't a lie. It was what you might call a politically useful truth. It was a case of using a technically sound accounting method to both expose a real, long-standing problem of financial transparency and to achieve a political goal, all at the same time.
So after all the dust settled, what was the long-term result of this whole manufactured crisis? This might be the most paradoxical part of the entire story. What did that shockwave actually leave in its wake?
Well, that massive shock back in 2018 basically acted as a form of shock therapy for the whole system. The crisis narrative was kept alive for years, and it created the political momentum needed to push through huge reforms that have been stalled for ages. And that all led to a brand new law in 2023 designed to lock in fiscal discipline for good.
And here is the ultimate irony. The new law actually forces the government to be crystal clear about the very same contingent liabilities, the off-the-books items that were weaponized to create the crisis in the first place. The political weapon that started the drama became the very tool for reform. And that leaves us with a really powerful question, one that goes way beyond Malaysia. In this age of data, when numbers can be framed and spun to tell almost any story, it forces us all to ask, what's the real difference between a misleading figure and a politically useful truth? And maybe more importantly, who gets to decide?